I'd like to talk about the benefits of erasing or wiping back paint, and it's something that maybe we don't do that often, or a lot of people don't. I recently have begun to do an awful lot because I find it quite exciting in the type of painting I'm doing, but it can be beneficial in all sorts of ways. It's a variation on glazing, really. We've talked about glazing, I'm sure, that whereby if you put a transparent layer of paint on top of other dry paint, it will change the color of that and the feel of it and so on. But what we're doing is this time around removing the paint. This is an old picture or painting I was doing as a part of another demo way back, and it was just a big leaf, and we were talking about how the paint went on and whatever. So I found it again. I think it was maybe done with acrylic. I'm not so sure. It doesn't matter whether it was acrylic or oil, it's as long as it's dry. That's the main thing, and it is dry. What I'm going to try to do is talk about also, if you look at those great paintings of the Dutch 17th century masters of still life, and you see the beautiful objects they've painted in, and especially in darker rooms when they didn't have obviously electric lights, so a lot of the light was dramatic coming from windows and things, and some of the fruit and vegetables and things that they painted almost come out of the shadows, and it's a beautiful sort of atmosphere. And they used a lot of these methods of overpainting and glazing and obliterating and revealing, if you like. And this is what I'm going to try to do with this leaf here. But so what I've got here, first of all, I've made up a very neutral color, believe it or not. It looks very blue, but it's actually not that blue. It's actually made from a blue and a yellow making a green, and then red in there, complementary to neutralize it. It's not critical what color this is. I've just used that because I want something that relates to green. I think that is quite important. So it's a cooler version, if you like, and it's quite thick. I haven't diluted it or anything at the moment anyway. Secondly, what I've got is some of this liquid. Now, we could be using linseed oil and maybe a little turpentine in it, as long as it's quite sticky, oily. But I use a lot of liquid because it speeds up the drying time. So in this little tub here, it's just pure liquid straight from the jar. And knowing that this is dry, what I've recently begun to do is rub the liquid over the whole thing. So not too thick, just a very thin scrub. I mean, you can see that one brush load. You can see how it's covering the background and everything else. I just want a little thin stain of this over, because that will create an oily surface on which I can remove the paint a wee bit more easily. That's simply all. Now, because we've already got liquid on there now, we can actually go ahead, if we wanted, this is the pure paint, and put that on. I don't know if you can see this here, that's thick paint, straight from the tube paint. And I'm going to put it over the whole thing here. And I'll go up into the background as well, there, And maybe even move to a slightly bigger brush, take it right out to the edges, just see. And already you can see, obviously, the ghost of the leaf still below there, So what I'm going to do is, I have these brushes by my side ready to go. And with rags, preferably rags rather than kitchen roll, because kitchen roll comes off in little bits. So the rags work slightly better. I can begin to reveal bits of this now. So I'm gonna take that edge, let's say. I'm just gonna take that back a little bit there. So I'm leaving that side a little less white, as it were. And then what I can do with the brush, I've I'm cleaning the brush, by the way, giving it a wipe anyway. I can then begin to soften up areas with the brush and barely touching the surface with the brush here, okay? And the softer the brush, the softer the surface, of course. This isn't probably the greatest in the world, but it's working okay. So I can then maybe take and wipe a bit harder here, look, around the edge of that. So it can begin to reveal a little bit more. I've got my fingers in the cloth here and rub that along the edge. So we're kind of getting that to move out. Now, something I've been doing that I'm not going to recommend it, but I'm just going to come out and say I'm using just my finger. You can maybe use gloves if you feel more comfortable, but I have found simply rubbing with my fingers, and though people might say, oh, oil paints, I'm not sure. So forgive me if I'm breaking all the rules of, all of that. And maybe what I'll do is I'll take maybe the top edge off the leaf here on this side. Okay, and just wipe that away. And because this paint will stay wet, it gives me plenty of time to play around. So I'm thinking I'll wipe away that edge there. And then maybe again, where's my slightly smaller brush here? Not sure if this wee brush will work or not. It's maybe a wee bit soft. But just using this wee brush to soften that edge a little bit. Again, I might be tempted to use my fingers, but I'm going to be very good this time. So we can see the edge of that. You can see the lovely translucence that's going on in that area. And what I might do is say, well, you know what? I'm going to continue over. I'm going to re-glaze over this bit. And I'm going to just take this section and let this light maybe at the tip of the leaf might be interesting, So if I take that down a little bit, so I haven't planned anything here. I'm just playing, experimenting as I go. But I think, yeah, what if we were to take and reveal the top edge of this leaf here, okay, coming out. And because the paint below is dry, we're revealing the colours. You can sometimes rub away the colours underneath. It can happen, but you can see that if I just lift bits that I choose here and watch how it affects the mood of the picture there. I'm thinking, well, what if I carry a little bit of light in there and a wee bit of light in here, but not too much, okay? And again, with a soft brush, or in my case, my finger, I can rub that in there, and you can begin to see the edge of the leaf going back, as it were, in the shadow. And what I might do, I'll just maybe rub this a little bit here as we go further back. So we rub harder. You can see there, we rub harder, we take more away. To say there is a risk you take a little bit of paint away with it, but generally, if the paint is very, very dry, that's not happening there. So you can see that I'm fading it from the light back into the shadow there. And again, if you try to imagine, and I daren't compare myself to the great 17th century Dutch masters, but these are the sort of things that they would have been aware of. They would have maybe used brushes and things and other tools, maybe, but they would have rubbed with rags and things as well. Maybe take a wee light edge there. I kind of like the light edge in the end of that. What I'm going to do is actually take and make a little different colour. I just feel as if I might want to not have that quite as blue as that, so I'm just going to play around here. Bear with me. I'm making up that blue and yellow, but I'm using ultramarine blue this time. I think the last time might have been something like Prussian blue, which is much bluer, much greener. So what I'm going to do at this end of the leaf here is I'm going to go ahead. You can see the difference in the colour here. Rub that all over the top. It looks really rough, and it is, but the thing is, because it stays wet we can arrange it and manipulate it. So even with a rag, and if you see my fingers through the rag, they're nice, even, flat. I can rub that very gently until you can see that it's evening out a wee bit, so that it's not no longer the sort of brush marks of visible. And then I'll rub that so that it's a softer. So I'm rubbing it from dark to light. So I'm rubbing a wee bit harder here and less down here. So I don't want to remove so much here. Whereas up here I would like to reveal the light a wee bit more. And you can see that the leaf is going back into the shadows. Imagine the shadows. I'm using this other colour actually around it just to let you see. You'll get rid of that that very blue colour on this side. Let's go over it again. It's amazing how much paint. This paint here that I'm putting on is straight from the tube. As I said before, it's not diluted. There was liquid put on there, but other than that, this is pure thick paint. But it's still allowing me to see the leaf below. So I'm daubing all that on. And again, I'm going to cop out here. I'm going to use my fingers. You can see, maybe you can see why I use my fingers, because it's great. You get a very even finish there, And I kind of rub in that. You can see slowly out. I'll maybe get the rag onto that in a minute or two. But I'll just take the rag now very, very gently. And of course, we can build this up in layers. We don't need to do it in one go like I'm doing it. But what I'm saying is that if you look at this area that I'm rubbing right now, the leaf's still in there. You can see the leaf below that there. And again, if I rub that, okay, I'll be very good here and try to use this little soft brush. And just very, very soft brush. Skimming it. There's probably hairs coming off. I can see it there, but well, bear with me, Cheap brush. And I'm even so there is the leaf going down into the shadows, and it's still there. I'm going to take another brush. I'm getting carried away here. Just rubbing that ever so lightly. So it's nearly gone, but it's in there. You squint your eyes, you know that there's a shape down into the shadows. It's emerging out of the light. Imagine a light coming from a window, striking the edge of that leaf there, and then it disappears down into the shadows below. And it's a lovely technique. And all it involves is making an image like I did, let it dry, and then putting the paint over it and rubbing it away. Now this can be done to some extent with acrylic. It's more difficult. I think if you try to do this with acrylic, what I would say is you should get involved and get a medium to add, what's called a retarding medium, which is a medium in acrylic which slows down the drying time. You need that little bit of time to do this. Now, as I say, I could stop here and let this dry and glaze again and see how far down I can go before the leaf almost disappears. But hopefully you can see the atmosphere in that and the sense of light and shade. What I'll do is maybe finish with trying, don't know whether I can rub back any more light. But of course, if I wanted more light, I can, and this is again what the old masters would have done. If you want that little bit more light, and I'll just do this to finish with, is that I could put a light touch on. So I'm using some white here. I don't know if you can see it in the corner. A wee bit of yellow and a wee bit of this color here. Let's see what we get. So I get a warmer, brighter color, just like a highlight color. It's probably a wee bit over the top, to be honest with you, but just for the sake of the thing, we could just say, okay, when this is all dry, I can go back in here, brighten up this bit, and really hammer home the idea of the light. So, I can repaint little sections and say there's where the real brightest of the sunlight is catching this tip of this leaf. So not too much. It's this whole business of if if we overdo it, then it defeats the effect. And again, being who I am, I'll rub over my finger, but I hope you see the little glow of light on the front of the leaf there. So this is a variation on the theme, really. This is the little acrylic painting demo that I was doing earlier, and as you can see, it's very rich colors really in it, but this idea of applying and removing paint still applies with acrylic. It is different. As I said before, oils remains wet for a long time and therefore gives you lots of time to manipulate. Theoretically, it could be for hours really. Acrylic, not so much. You have got a short window of time, but it's still possible to change the mood and the atmosphere and the overall color feel of a painting with acrylic. So what I'm going to do here, I've got a rag here which is slightly damp, not soaking wet, just damp, and I have in the corner of my palette here a grey acrylic paint I've made up from blue, white and a little bit of black. So there's a bluish tint about it, but really, you know, for the sake of the exercise, it could be any sort of a grey. But what I'm doing with this damp rag, I'm just going to very gently, and remember, acrylics are waterproof. Once they're dry, they're basically plastic, and that's a good thing, but it can be a difficult thing too. I'm wiping that, and I'm actually almost drying it slightly as well. So there's the slightest dampness to this surface. Obviously, it's important to make sure your acrylic painting's completely dry before doing this, because you're liable to wipe off the colours. And then I'm taking this brush again. This is not dilute, by the way. This paint, again, it's straight from the tube, and I'm rubbing it in to the whole painting. And it's not a very big painting, so it's not difficult to do. With this damp rag in my hand still, what I'm going to do, and you can see that how I'm working fairly fast, and it's necessary to do this. I can rub back parts, some parts more than others, depends on how I feel, and you can see that we create this glaze. I'm rubbing little bits away there a wee bit more than others, but you can see how it leaves this residue of a haze there, and yet the colours are still fairly strong. So what I'm trying to point out here is, if I go back in, let's say this bottom area here with this grey, and one of the other benefits of acrylics is they're still slightly more transparent even when they're thick. You can see there that is over the top of that brown tint. Now what I'm doing is this rag slightly drier. It's not full of water or anything, so therefore it won't wipe back as quickly because the water's not on it. So it's a dry thing, but you can see that as I rub that section out, sometimes again I'm rubbing a little bit more than others just to bring that back. And now let's say if I take the same grey and put it on this, over this blue area here, and again go in fairly quickish with this rag, wipe bits away. So I'm turning this into a much more desaturated set of colours, but I'm also creating, you know, some degree of atmosphere in that. I'm going to do the same here with the area where the hills are. So when you put this paint down at first, it is frightening, because you are obliterating everything you've done, but you have to be prepared to take some of these risks, I think, when you're manipulating paint and colour. So you can see they're wiping a bit away. The other thing about acrylics is they tend to go a bit more transparent as they dry. So as they dry, they won't be as opaque, they'll be more see-through. There are lumps here you can see on it where I was using a palette knife at one point. But you can see if I rub hard here, I can still lift away the odd little bit of green, brighter green I should say, and say, right, okay, let that come out. Again, like I did earlier with my thumb, before the paint dries, I can rub it with my thumb. And I might even take, while I'm at it, go up into the sky, which was fairly blue really, and maybe take and grey a lot of that down over there. Bring that route maybe right down over the hills here. see what happens over the top of the hills, this whole section. You can see it's all obliterated. Now I'm going to reveal very carefully. I'm going to wipe gently. I don't want to reveal too much because I would like it to look almost like there's a mist coming over those hills. So I can create a different feel to the thing, and maybe rub that back a wee bit more and leave that blue alone perhaps. So you can see, if I dip the rag, by the way, in water, and if the paint hasn't dried too much, you can see here, if I rub it, look, and wipe it fairly quickly, I can erase parts of it. So that's quite possible. And once the paint does catch and dry, this is nearly impossible. But if there's that dampness about the paint, you can see that I can actually wipe bits away. I'll maybe even, just for the sake of it, do a little bit back on the green side of this hill there, look. So that maybe this is a bright side here, the sun's catching it or something there. So what you can see is applying and revealing paint can be very exciting, sort of a technique. And the only way I think to explore it is to be courageous, really courageous, because what's the worst that can happen? Now, for instance, if I, the worst that can happen is the painting just disappears and that's it, but you've learned something. What I'm going to do here, just with that in mind, is taking, I'm going to take some more of the black. You can see it in the corner here. So this is really getting quite heavy duty, and not really any water in there at all. But I just want to let you see how things really change. I'm just going to throw that over the whole of this. I don't know really what's going to happen. I honestly don't know what's going to happen to this, but I want to try it anyway over that whole top section, let's say there. And before that completely dries, I can soften up the edges, just get my rag there and just with my hand underneath it, just rubbing that back there all the way in to that sky area here. So, some of it I'm rubbing a little bit harder, some of it not so much. And you can see now the atmosphere changing. Let's go in now while I've got that. Let's go down and maybe kill off some of this. So actually, I'm really obliterating a lot of this color here, but then revealing small amounts. So whereas at the beginning of this painting, it was large amounts of fairly rich color, it's now large amounts of extremely muted color with a wee bit of bright stuff coming out. So there's a wee bit of bright stuff there where I've rubbed a little bit harder. I'm just rubbing it ever so gently. And then here and there, you can hear that, rubbing quickly down into those colors. Maybe overdid it. You don't want big lumps of super bright color, but I just want to show you how this changes it. Bring out a wee bit of green along the edge of the water there. Maybe rub that mountain back a wee bit more and so on. Maybe rub a wee bit of light into the clouds. So here and there, and just wiping that back a wee bit more. You can see the texture of the paint where I've been, as I used a palette knife earlier, but that doesn't matter. It's still showing the effect. Maybe a wee bit of light across the top of the hills. And those hills in the distance are disappearing. And you can see now, I hope, suddenly a very different and a very much more atmospheric picture, different feel to it altogether. And in theory, I can keep on doing this. The secret is, you with acrylic, work fast, don't let it dry completely. And as long as the rag is wet, you can then, look, I can even rub, if I'm quick about it and clever about it, I can even rub out little suggestions of grass and things here. I know I'm being a bit, but I can draw into it with my fingernail through the edge of this thing there, my fingernail through the rag. And it's quite fun. You can lift away a wee bit there and just say, look, there's a wee bit of light in those mountains in the distance. A wee bit of light, maybe I'll rub that back before it dries. Like there's light cracking along there. behind the mountains and so on. So take the courage and do this. This is a small, very small picture. It's smaller than A4, but you can do this on paper, on bits of card, and see how you can change the atmosphere.